Hi, my name is Lisa Allistway, and I create fun, inspirational, and informational videos you can use and apply to your life. Today's topic is on how to hike Pikes Peak. But before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and the bell to be alerted when the next video drops. Okay, let's begin. It is my privilege to introduce to you today's guest, Bruce McClintock. He is the founder and CEO, that's Chief Exploration Officer, of Hike for Life. Bruce grew up in Colorado, but did not start hiking until he was a teenager. He summited Pikes Peak for the first time at age 14 from Craig's Trailhead, which is the same route that Hike for Life guides today. Since then, he has climbed more than 40 of Colorado's 14ers and has hiked all over the world. Bruce created Hike for Life to help share the wonder and joy of the outdoors and to help people that are new to hiking. He is trained in wilderness first aid and believes in the importance of helping others hike more safely and with respect and appreciation for our fragile outdoor environment. Bruce is also on the board of the Colorado Mountain Club, which is a nonprofit outdoor group. I will be linking Bruce's website, Hike for Life, down in the description box. Bruce, would you like to add anything else to that introduction and anything about Hike for Life?
I'd love to. So a little bit about my background kind of prior to Hike for Life. You talked a little bit about when I first started hiking and how I developed a passion for the outdoors at a young age. And I was actually lucky over the years, besides kind of that first encounter with like a 14,000 foot peak when I was in the Boy Scouts, where I had mentors and outdoor leaders, to actually have served in the military too. So before doing what I'm doing now, I spent a while in the military, a few decades in fact, and a lot of the military training at times has to do with outdoor survival situations and things like that. So I was blessed with having a variety of different resources to give me the skills and the confidence to actually get outdoors in a way that was safe and within my bounds and not ending up too often in dangerous situations. So that's a little bit of the backstory that's helpful because one of the reasons I started Hike for Life in about 2017 is back when I was in the military and moved all over the world, literally, I would always come back to Colorado typically about once a year for about a week at a time. And my goal was always to climb another 14,000 foot peak. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but it was always a very extensive planning process. And then I would go out and consider the weather, have all the right equipment, and try to summit a peak. Sometimes I'd make it, sometimes I wouldn't. But I was very often running into people having what I called the awkward trail conversation. And what I mean by that is I'd be on my way down usually with friends, other hiking buddies and things like that. And we're on our way down and we're coming down at a certain time to avoid lightning storms or there's weather rolling in or other factors. And we've got all our gear and we'd run into people that were on their way up the trail that were getting a late start. They maybe didn't have the right equipment. And they didn't seem to have the level of awareness or preparedness for equipment that we thought was appropriate. Now, I call it the awkward trail conversations because we always want to be respectful of other people and their right to do things their way or without a lot of outside advice or suggestions or things like that. But on the other hand, there were always often times where I'd run into people and if they kept going the way they were going, I felt like they might be putting themselves into more danger than they realized. So you want to strike that balance between saying something to some complete stranger that you encounter on the trail or just letting them go, right? And I tend to always err towards wanting to help out people. But, it was just this literally random meeting on a trail where we pass along advice. And the real impetus for Hike for Life was having these conversations over many years, right? Coming back, hiking, things like that. But in 2016, Colorado tied its own record for the number of backcountry fatalities. So these are people that were out hiking and exploring and doing things. And unfortunately, a large number of people died. And in general, it was because they were putting themselves in situations that were beyond their ability levels, or they caught in lightning storms or something like that. And it was that was the impetus for me to say, I've got to do something more to move the needle and help people than just have these random conversations on the trail. So that's how we started Hike for Life.
And what year was that you started Hike for Life?
So it was, I say it was a twinkle in my eye well before then, because it was something I thought, how can I help people and share my passion for the outdoors? But we actually officially incorporated in December of 2017. So we're just over 3 years old.
Okay, still fairly new. So what is your mission for Hike for Life?
So our mission is multifaceted, but we like to say that our mission is to help educate, support, and guide explorers so that they can more safely and responsibly enjoy our great outdoors. And I can unpack that a little bit more if you want as we go, but that's essentially our mission statement.
Sure. And so today's topic is on hiking Pikes Peak, but your organization will work with other groups and other areas around Colorado that you can hike, correct?
That's correct. So we like to refer to ourselves as an outdoor education company disguised as a hiking guide service, and our target audience is really entry-level hikers, right? So
Like
Pikes
me.
Peak, well, a lot of people, right? So, but things like Pikes Peak that we're talking about specifically today, or 14ers, or maybe winter backcountry hiking, that's the most advanced thing that we do in Hike for Life. We are a day hiking company. We're talking about doing more kind of overnight kind of things because there's guests that we've had that want to return and come back and do things with us. But we start very much entry level, and you are advanced entry level, because we have people that come to us, all they want to do is take a 2-hour hike in a scenic place like Garden of the Gods, and not have to worry about any of the details. And we're happy to accommodate them because they become part of our audience and part of our community, and we can share the basics of responsible exploration with them, even on something as simple as a 2-hour hike in Garden of the Gods.
Okay, excellent. So all different levels you guys cater to.
Yep.
Okay, so for the audience, I want to tell a little bit about Pikes Peak. It is located 12 miles west of downtown Colorado Springs, Colorado, and it is the highest summit of the southern front range of the Rocky Mountains in North America, and it stands at 14,115 feet. So it is considered one of the 14ers. Myself, not being much of a hiker and not knowing much about that world, when I heard 14er, I thought it meant you're going 14 miles up. When I first met Bruce, and we were like, no, 14ers are like all over, and it's about the elevation. And I thought that was an interesting conversation because I live in Houston, where the elevation is 100 feet. And the only mountains around here are highway overpasses and buildings. And so one of the things that I did for my trip was I flew in on a Monday and I did the hike on Friday, which I don't recommend. Most of what I've read is you need to acclimate to the area. And Colorado Springs is at 6,000 feet. So you need to give yourself time. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. So just a little background for why I wanted to hike Pikes Peak. I remember learning about Pikes Peak as a little girl, and the seed was planted. And I remember hearing about that people hiked it, but this was before the internet, and I didn't know much research on how people could hike Pikes Peak. So fast forward to the summer of 2019, I was trying to figure out my summer vacation plans, and I thought this is as good a time as any to do it. this is something I've always wanted to do. And so I made the decision to hike Pikes Peak as part of my vacation in summer of 2019. Now, a problem that occurred is I didn't have any friends that wanted to hike it, or they couldn't get off from work to hike it, or they couldn't afford to hike it. So I knew there was probably some hiking group. And so I just did some random research on the internet, and I found Hike for Life. And I called and emailed the organization, and I got on the phone, and Bruce answered. And I know, Bruce, you are used to getting random inquiries about people hiking Pikes Peak or other areas. What are some of the things that you do on the phone with those initial phone calls to really vet people?
So yeah, a great question, Lisa, and it's really helpful to hear that background. And by the way, it's one of my favorite kind of little anecdotes from how we help educate and inspire people is, and there's no reason that you would have known that, right? But things like 14er, that's just common lingo in Colorado. Everybody knows that a 14er is something that's over 14,000 feet. So, but completely legitimate assumption to say, well, no, you have to hike 14 miles. I literally remember being on the trail with you after going through a couple of different options. And I think we were like 3 miles into the hike, and you said, well, I guess this doesn't really count as a 14er if I make it to the top, does it? And I said, well, of course it does. Why not? Well, because we're not hiking 14 miles to the summit. So I love that story, and I appreciate you sharing it too, because that helps inform others that it's okay to not know everything and learn. And that's, frankly, even just having people call us and ask us questions about Pikes Peak, similar to your experience, gives us the opportunity to educate, right? So we're a social impact business. So it's not like we're lawyers or something where we're charging by the minute of advice or something like that. We want people to reach out to us and ask questions. And whether or not they hike with us, that's fine. At least they're better equipped for whatever it is that they're trying to do. So to your question, and we get numerous calls where people say, similar to your experience, they say, hey, I want to climb Pikes Peak. Can you help me? And sometimes it's as extreme as somebody will say, hey, I'm flying in Friday night. I'd like to climb Pikes Peak on Saturday, and then I fly out Sunday afternoon. And the very first thing we do, because we are oriented towards safety, is we caution them against that kind of approach. You coming in a week, Monday, and doing it on Friday is really close to the minimum that we recommend. So we immediately tell them, you really need to think twice about how much time you take to acclimatize, which is getting used to the altitude, right? Because your body is able to take in less oxygen. It's working harder. And coming from sea level like you did to 6,000 feet, that's challenging enough for some people, but then going all the way up to 14,000 feet, exerting yourself is a big challenge too. So we've actually developed over time a screening questionnaire that will ask people either over the phone, and then we send it to them in an email as well, so we have a record of it. And we'll start with basic questions like, where do you live? What's the elevation there? How often do you exercise? What kind of exercise do you do? What background and experience do you have hiking? And that can be, well, I hike a mile every other day in my local community park, but hiking a mile every other day in a community park in Houston or somewhere in Iowa that's close to sea level is completely flat is very different than even a 1 mile hike in Colorado. So we ask those kind of, we just call them, it's really a screening questionnaire, but we're referring to them as kind of a introductory, getting acquainted kind of discussion. And then we'll offer them advice on what we think is an ideal plan for them. And flying in the night prior, trying to climb Pikes Peak the next day with zero climatization and sometimes not the right level of physical conditioning is not an ideal plan.
So. Right. And I know from our conversation, some of the information that you sent me was that I was required to sign a waiver. Can you just kind of briefly go over what the waiver entails?
Yeah, so, and this is before I talk about the details of the waiver, let me talk about why it's for anybody that's talking about going out and exploring in the backcountry or doing things like hiking or summiting Pikes Peak or whatever. You want to make sure that you're operating with a reputable outfitter. Outfitter is the industry term for people that guide you or take you fly fishing or take you ice climbing or rock climbing. And any reputable outfitter is going to require that you sign a liability and release waiver, as well as it should also ask you about any pre-existing medical conditions. So there's really kind of three key parts to like the Hike for Life waiver, and this is fairly common across the industry. One, you want to ask people about any pre-existing medical conditions that could affect their ability to perform the activities, heart conditions, asthma, allergies, really those kind of things that could impact their ability to do well. And also, you want your guide to know those things if something happens to you while you're out on the trail, right? You don't want to be shy about the fact that, I've got a severe allergic reaction to bee stings or something like that, and I carry an epinephrine pen, right? That's something you want to exchange up front. It's part of the preparation. So any reputable outfitters should ask you those kinds of questions. The next thing they're going to do is they're going to ask to confirm that you release the company from liability for any unexpected mishaps and things like that, right? There are literally things called acts of God. Lightning does strike sometimes, even assuming the best preparation of the guides and the company and everything else. So that's a very common thing. The other thing that's built into the Hike for Life waiver, although we're happy to honor somebody that doesn't want to participate in this, is it's a release for use of media, basically. Any videos or pictures or things like that that are taken on the hike. The reason we do that is because a big part of our mission is to actually try to inspire people to get outdoors by sharing the stories of others that have done it. To show people at an entry level, you don't have to be some X Games athlete to get out on a basic day hike. So when you see pictures of other people doing it, it can be inspirational. And we always try to tie in a little bit of our safety and responsibility ethos into our social media.
Okay, very good. Another helpful thing that you sent me before I made the trip is you sent me a gear list. So just real briefly, let's kind of go over some of the things that are in the gear list. First is hydration, and probably the best tip I can give you is to drink plenty of water before, during, and after. I really think that was maybe what made my hike so successful. Obviously also having Bruce there, but drinking lots of water before you land in Colorado, like a week before, start loading up while you're there, during the hike, and then drink lots of water after the hike. Any other comments about hydration?
Yeah, and so for your audience, what you're doing now is you're about to run through the 5 fundamentals. This is the way that we structure the basic considerations and things that you want to have on any hike, whether it's climbing Pikes Peak or not. So hydration is the first one. And we typically, for any hike, what we tell people is take twice the water for the planned duration of the activity. So really take more water than you think you need. Because in general, that's a good rule of thumb for hiking. In Colorado, it's especially important because it is a very dry climate, and people don't realize how quickly they get dehydrated here. Dehydration lowers your performance and actually makes you more susceptible, obviously, to things like dehydration sickness and other things. And for the Pikes Peak hike in particular, we typically talk about kind of 3 phases of hydration. There's the pre-hydration. You talked about it as well. Start loading up on water days in advance of coming. And it could be just drinking an extra half liter or liter a day. For the Pikes Peak hike, the pre-hydration, we talk about a liter the night before you go to bed, and then another liter more than you're used to drinking the morning. Not the stuff you're going to drink on the hike, but the pre-hydration part. You can be overly excessive. We don't want somebody to overhydrate, but that liter thing is well within the realm of what's acceptable. And it's scientifically proven, and our experience proves that people that pre-hydrate perform better on the hike. They have a better experience. They might have to stop and go to the bathroom more often, but that's actually
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Hydration on the hike. We talk about the importance of actually drinking continually throughout the hike. So you can both have the Nalgene bottles, which are nice because you can track how much you're drinking. But then the hydration bladders are good too because you can drink frequently. And we really push the water on the hike. I don't know if you remember that, Lisa, but it's like
Yes.
almost every single
Yes.
time, every stop, it's like, okay, go ahead and take a drink of water. I'm going to drink some too. How much have you had?
Yep.
That's really important. And then obviously post hike, you just want to keep your body hydrated as well. So lots to talk about hydration. Final point on that, we include electrolytes in the hydration discussion. So it's not just water, it's actually having the electrolytes that you typically we alternate it. It's a personal technique, what your body's used to, but make sure you take some electrolyte packs or something that includes something more than just the H2O.
Okay. All right. Nutrition. Let's briefly touch on that. What are some tips, strategies you would give with regards to nutrition in the day of the hike?
So nutrition, the philosophy we like to remind people about is you want to think about there's two analogies for it. Think about your body either being like a campfire or like an engine, right? So the campfire analogy is kind of better for hiking. What you don't do is you don't let the fire burn down to just embers and then throw a bunch of chunks of wood on it, right? You don't let it almost die out and then try to get it to bonfire back up, right? You want to kind of keep a steady, put another log on the fire every hour or so kind of thing. And you want to do the same thing with your body too. So you want to spread out your nutrition is one point. So when you're not out on a very demanding hike, that's not the time to go 3 hours without eating and then sit down and have a 5-course meal, right? You literally want to snack as you go. It's beyond that, it's really kind of personal preference. There's all kinds of tips and techniques out there. I would say just make it a mix of sweet and savory kind of things, right? So common things are trail mix with some nuts mixed in, beef jerky, peanut butter and honey sandwich. A lot of people like those kind of things. So whatever it is that you typically like to eat, that's going to keep your fire burning.
Yeah, no Big Macs, okay? Keep it healthy, nutrient dense type of snacks and food.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about navigation on the day of the hike. Can you give us a little brief overview of that?
Yeah, so navigation is the third fundamental for us. And we, most of us that are on the team are kind of old schooler, well-trained hikers that, we have a lot of experience with literally map and compass skills. But we don't want to be, so old guard that we're not open to new technology. So our mantra when it comes to navigation is ideally you're going to always have two practiced and available means of navigation is the way that we put it. So we always try to showcase by showing up with a paper map. And I actually have, this isn't Pikes Peak, but I just happen to have a map for another outing that we were doing, and we'll print out a paper map and we'll give it to people at the end of the hike and say, this is important because it's like your tech backup, right? If your high tech options fail, you will at least have a map, and everybody should have at least a basic sense of north is up and things like that, and how to read the basics of a map. But we're not like some kind of a orienteering company, right? Where we're gonna throw you, parachute you out in the woods and you get nothing but a map and compass and you have to find your way to safety, right? It's just good to have those backups at the basics level. And most people don't even know there's like a compass on their phone, right? So you can use that as an opportunity just to find out that you're going in the right direction. But we're also big believers in apps, right? There's a lot of basic apps out there. All Trails is a popular one that we recommend, first of all, because the basic version is free and includes a lot of good information. In Colorado, there's one called Cotrex that you can, again, download for free, and that has a useful kind of a distance finder tool built into it. The point about that is we say practiced and available. So practice means you know how to use it. So don't download the app the night before you're going to go somewhere and try to figure it out on the trail, right? And available has two parts. If your cell phone battery dies, those apps aren't available, right? So Always take a cell phone, a spare battery on a hike of any duration. You don't need it for in-city hikes, but these
Mhm.
apps can be real battery hogs. So you want to make sure you have
Mhm.
the battery available. And then also, a lot of the apps are dependent on cell phone signal. If you don't start them in advance of the hike, before you get out of cell phone range, they won't work. Or if you don't download the maps you need in advance, they're not going to show you anything but the blue dot on the middle of a blank screen, which won't be helpful. So, mantra on navigation, two means of practiced and available navigation anytime you go out on a hike.
Well, I definitely appreciate your old school skills just in case technology fails. So that's good to know. Also, one thing that I really liked about your company and that the day of our hike is that you used a GPS system and were able to show like friends and family where we were at on the mountain. So my mom made this trip and she could try to track throughout the day where we were going up the mountain. So maybe talk a little bit about that GPS system y'all offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I have mine, and this is an older one. So this is actually, the company's changed its name. It used to be owned by DeLorme. It's now a different company, but this is an example of a GPS device that we carry on our backcountry and summit hikes, really more as a means of mitigation. But it does provide, and I'll talk about mitigation now a little bit. We can cover it in more depth later. These can be used for navigation too. So it is like that practiced and available means of navigation. But mostly these are uh, in extremis messaging devices, right? It's got a big old GPS antenna on them. New ones have smaller antennas. Uh, and what you can do is you can actually link up like we did with your mom, send a
Mhm.
tracking message to somebody so they can open an app that they can follow along exactly where you are. There's a way to send GPS messages like SOS signals, right? And I
Mhm.
think I did it with you as well, but it's kind of our industry standard, our company standard now. It's the guide's responsibility to know how to use this, right? So if something
Mhm.
happens to somebody in their party and you're out of cell phone signal, which you can't count on cell phone signal most places in the backcountry, this is how you communicate with search and rescue, right? It's help them find you, and we have techniques that we pass along for what information that they need that's most helpful to them. What is the condition of the person that's injured, or what's the circumstances. But the thing that I like to tell people is it's as simple as what we tell you. I usually do it the very first water stop, right? I'll usually we'll go up and kind of go up that first little hill on the Pikes Peak Trail, and people are getting a feel for what it's like, and I'll say, okay, this is a pretty important piece of information. I'm responsible for your safety, but if I fall down, get knocked unconscious. Uh, Here's what I want you to know how to do. And I literally show them, see this little SOS button right here? That doesn't work unless you pull this lever over. And once you do that, this button is activated. Press that button. That's all I need you to know how to do. There's some other basic instructions on the back, and that will ensure my personal safety as well as yours in a circumstance where I might be incapacitated. So we you don't need something like this for front country hiking, but if you're ever going to get
Mhm.
out in the back country where you're going to be out of cell phone signal, uh,
Mhm.
absolutely. If you're going to go solo hiking, which I do
Mhm.
occasionally, there's a higher risk with that. Um, so I minimize the times that I do that, but you want to have this as a safety device, and you want to use that tracking option that we discussed. Does that help?
Okay. Yes, excellent. Okay, so let's talk about protection, starting with headgear.
Yeah, so protection is the next fundamental that we talk about, and it is really kind of a head to toe approach to what you need to keep yourself safe and comfortable, right? And so there's a
Mhm.
variety of aspects to that. But you start at the head, so let's start at the top there. Um, the most important thing about kind of protection is what environment are you operating in, right? Are you in the middle of summer or are you in the middle of winter, right? Because your protection is going to change based on the environmental conditions. In the summertime, when we do most of our hikes, but even some of the hikes we start in the summertime, it can be pretty chilly in the morning, maybe not below
Mhm.
freezing, but down in the 40s easily. So you want like a light headband or a light wool cap or something like that. to just keep your head warm. That's a big source of heat loss for the body, is if your head's not protected. Right? So it's that kind of protection. The more common thing we talk about in the summer, especially on our basic hikes, is protection from the sun, right? So wide brimmed hat is recommended, baseball cap as a minimum, sunscreen to back that up, and then sunglasses as we work our way down. And then, I won't cover every item of clothing or anything, but then you just go, all the way down, head to toe. Long sleeve shirts are preferred because of the sun protection, wind protection. A couple of layers in the summer with a backup layer for rain, all the way down to the kind of pants you wear that you want, maybe a lightweight thermal layer below, and then some hiking pants that are going to cut the wind a little bit. Socks are incredibly important, and then the kind of shoes that you're wearing are important too. Now, let you talk about shoes.
Oh, okay. I wanted to show the audience, when you do this, you don't want to do it in your regular tennis shoes. So when I decided I was going to do it and I needed to get a good pair of hiking boots, this is a great brand. I'm not getting paid for this. This is a great brand, Obos. They are pricey, but I think you get what you pay for. And I like the higher, support here. And the reason I recommend it is I literally bought this hiking boot a couple weeks before the trip, wore it a couple times. I did not break it in that much. I hiked Pikes Peak in it, and I did not have blisters. So that might be an unusual testimonial, but that was my case. So in other words, pay a little bit more. These are probably like $150 or so, and get a quality hiking boot.
Yeah, it's really important to have the appropriate footwear, and it's one of the challenges I think that we face as a company that supports and mentors and guides entry level hikers, is they'll see a lot of things on social media where there's people, there's high, these are like X level athletes that are minimalists, right? So you'll see these people out on a trail and they literally have like no shirt on. All they have is like this tank top hydration kind of vest, running shorts, no show socks, and some of these like different brands of like nothing to the shoe, right?
Yeah.
And people say, oh, well, if they can do that, why do I need these big hiking boots? Well, the reality is they've trained for many years to get to that level of conditioning, and they've gone through different kind of shoe options. Not everybody needs a big, burly, high-ankled hiking boot, but you really need to consider the conditions that you're getting into. And I would say you had the minimum amount of time prior to getting your shoes to break them in, right? You don't want to buy them the week prior and show up and the first time you wear them is on the trail, because it takes time to get used to everything. So yeah, the footwear is pretty important. We're happy to talk you through options, and every guide has their own preference on shoes, but I've got, like, no exaggeration, at least 4 different pairs of hiking shoes that go all the way from trail running shoes, lightweight at the low end, to intermediate weight, similar to something that's a little bit less burly than the Obos that you just held up. I have a pair of Obos too that I typically use for winter hiking because they're waterproof. And if I know I'm going to be doing more rugged off trail kind of hiking. And then I actually have another set of boots that is a intentionally made for winter hiking boot. So it's insulated. It's much heavier duty. So get the right equipment for your circumstances. Don't try to lowball it and come out in a pair of flip-flops.
Definitely. So your gear list is more comprehensive than what we're going to cover here, but some other things on there is like trekking poles. I didn't use them for my hike. That's maybe a personal choice. Backpacks, toilet paper, a bag to put your toilet paper in so you don't leave any litter behind on the trail, and so on. But Bruce will send you that gear list that has all that good information on there. So I would like to kind of talk about what I did in preparation for this hike once I landed. Like I said, I landed on a Monday and I hiked Pikes Peak on Friday. And so when I flew in on Monday, day one, I went straight to Manitou Incline. And for those of you that don't know what Manitou Incline is, it's this 1 mile staircase, I guess you could say. It's a free hiking trail where basically you're going to cover 2,000 feet in 1 mile. And I thought, okay, this would be a great way to help me acclimate day one. So I got off the plane, checked into the hotel, went straight to Manitou Incline, and I did the 1 mile. And it took me about an hour to get to the top. And it's just 1 mile. And just kind of an interesting tidbit about it, the fastest time ever set to go up Manitou Incline was by Joseph Gray for 17 minutes and 45 seconds, which is really impressive, because the average grade for the incline is 45%, with some areas as steep as 68%. And also just another little fun fact about it, the world record for Manitou Incline is Greg Cummings. He was able to summit it the most in a year at 1,720 times. And that's an average of 5 summits a day that he was able to break that record. So is that something you would recommend? Is that if people come in and they need to acclimate, maybe check out Manitou Incline before Pikes Peak?
Lisa, the short answer is no. We do not recommend people come out and try to do the Manitou Incline as their first Colorado hiking activity. There's a couple reasons for it. You've covered a few of them. And I'll skip the history of the Manitou Incline. It's a great, what I'll call elite athlete training ground. And it has also become kind of this badge of honor type of destination that people that don't live in Colorado come out to, and they say, well, I've got to go do the Manitou Incline because I read about it online, right? But it is really hard. I mean, those times that you cited, again, this is an example of, well, those are world record times for doing this. You know, I live here, I'm not in the best shape, but I hike regularly, and I'm in the 40 to 45 minute range. And that's working hard. I mean, that's breaking a sweat, things like that. Another thing I'll say about it, and I love Manitou. Manitou's a great place to visit, but the incline has become very touristy, right? Because it's gotten such a popular reputation. I sometimes call it God's Stairmaster. And it's kind of like going to your local gym where everybody's walking around with headphones and, things like that. If you want to experience the outdoors, it's really not the best way to enjoy the serenity of the Colorado outdoors, because people use it as a gym and as something that's, again, it's these bragging rights. I did the incline, right? We are really big into this progression to what your level of comfort and ability is. And that's jumping into the deep end to try to do the Manitou Incline. And my fear is always people are going to come out and try that. And at the very least, they're going to have a negative experience, and they're going to, people go out there and they try to do it too fast. They rush off from the beginning, they end up throwing up, and they come away from it with this really negative experience of what it means to go hiking, right? So I wouldn't call that a hike. It's a very different class of experience. And in the extreme, we actually have people that have to call for search and rescue just on the incline, especially in the summer, because you can get pretty hot on the incline. So people, they don't know the hydration rules that we talked about earlier. They come out mid-afternoon, the sun's blazing right on them, and they ended up getting dehydrated and having to dial 911. What I will tell you, so that was kind of, don't recommend that. Here's what we tell most people that are coming out. Again, yes. 2 weeks prior is ideal for Pikes Peak. Hardly anybody has the time to do that. We understand that, okay? So if you're not going to be able to come out 2 weeks prior, we say, act as if you're training for a half marathon. The route we take, which we'll talk about a little bit later, I think, is about a half marathon in length. It's about 14 miles, okay, give or take. So act as if you're training yourself, your body, to do a half marathon. It doesn't matter if you live in Houston or Florida or Iowa, you can train for a half marathon. You're not going to get the elevation gain and descent, but your body will be used to kind of that level of conditioning. You're not going to be going at that pace, but it's kind of like the pace can offset the ascent and descent a little bit. So you can't come out 2 weeks prior. Start working out as if you're training for a half marathon, and do the best you can. Not everybody has that time either. Come out as many days early as you can, and we recommend starting literally at one of the flattest hikes we offer is Garden of the Gods. And we offer like an easy classic Garden of the Gods hike that's about 3 miles, and then we have a more slightly longer immersive Garden of the Gods hike. And you don't even have to do it with us, right? But just come out, and I honestly think it's a shame that anybody comes to Colorado Springs and doesn't go see Garden of the Gods. It's just an incredibly beautiful, impressive place. So go there, take a 3 mile hike like the day you arrive or the next day, and that's very casual, right? But you're building your body up slowly. 6,000 feet, 3 miles, 300 feet of elevation gain. Then we recommend the next day or so do a couple of the backside of Pikes Peak hikes. One of the ones we do is actually starting at Crags Trailhead, and it goes to a rock formation called Crags. Now that's about 5 miles, but the difference is you're starting at 10,000 feet, and it's a good exposure to what you're getting yourself into on a Pikes Peak summit. It's a really pretty family hike. We have a lot of families that come out and they all think they might want to climb Pikes Peak, but they're not sure. And so we encourage them, do the Crags. Do it with us if you want to learn a little bit more about the outdoors, or hear about the environment, or have somebody that's going to keep you as safe as possible. And not every time, but more often than not, if we take a family of 5 out there, one of them will opt out of a Pikes Peak hike entirely. And then 2 will say, we want to do the hike, but we only want to go one way, which is an option that you have on Pikes Peak, as you know. And then 1 or 2 others will say, I want to do it. I want to do the full round trip. But they're giving themselves exposure to similar terrain, elevation, and things like that. Another option, one step beyond that, is called Pancake Rocks hike. It's a little bit longer, same concept. And then we generally encourage people to take the day prior to their summit attempt off, meaning no hiking. You can, go to see Royal Gorge, or go do some other sightseeing, but try to minimize your own personal physical activities so that you kind of give your body a day of rest. Does that all make sense?
Yes, and that's very good advice. I don't believe I even told you I was doing Manitou Incline on Monday, because you would have probably advised against it, but I definitely rested those days leading up to the hike, which was on a Friday, and this was in June. So keep that in mind as we're talking about the hike. And so one of the things, there's different trails you can go up, and we went up Craig's Head Trail. And we started very, very early in the morning before the sun came up. And one of the things we needed to have was a light, headlamp light, and which we only wore for about 30 minutes. So I would like you, Bruce, if you would just kind of talk about the day of our hike and some of the places that we went through and some of the things that we learned along the way, or you teach educationally along the way.
Sure, I'd love to. So as you just said for your audience, we started at Crags Trailhead, right, which is on the backside of Pikes Peak, we call it. Colorado Springs is on the east side of the Front Range, right at the edge of the Front Range. So to get to this trailhead that we guide on, you actually have to drive for about an hour to the west side of Pikes Peak, up to about 10,000 feet. And this is actually a conversation that Lisa, you and I had when you were calling out and asking about Pikes Peak. And it probably goes back to your understanding of what a 14er is. You originally said, hey, I want to hike Pikes Peak via Bar Trail, which is the more well-known trail. And we don't guide on that trail for a couple of different reasons. Really, the most important reason is we don't recommend it for first timers. Certainly not as a day hike. It can be done, yes, but we don't recommend it because Bar Trail is about 12 and a half miles one way, starting at Manitou Springs, which is around 7,000 feet. So you're hiking 12 and a half miles and gaining 7,000 feet of elevation when you go by Bar Trail. And even in 2 days, that's a lot. There's a place to camp halfway. A lot of people go for that option, which is a cool option. It's a lot of fun. But a lot more gear requirements, things like that. So we guide from the Crags, west side of Pikes Peak, starting at 10,000 feet. The Crags hike to the summit of Pikes Peak and back is 14 and a half miles round trip. So a little bit more than half the distance that you're going to go on the Bar Trail. It's also only about 4,400 feet of elevation gain. As we said earlier, you're starting at 10,000 feet, and you heard the elevation for Pikes Peak earlier. So there's a little bit up and down in there, but it's just the preferred option for first timers. So there's actually a campground there, Crags Campground, for people that are interested in doing that. You can actually camp out there. Otherwise, you got to drive up. There's enough snow there that they don't typically open the gate to the trailhead until the middle of May. So Lisa was coming out in June. You started the season earlier, and we just point that out because there can still be snow on portions of Pikes Peak, and I honestly think we did cross some snow fields, but I can't remember for sure.
Not a lot. There was some snow. Most of it's melted by the time it was the end of June. Yeah, it was the end of like June 12th. Something.
Right. So most of the snow is melted off by the end of June, but in the middle of June, like this year, I'm going to be guiding somebody May 14th, guaranteed they're going to have snow, and there's other gear that we require for those kind of hikes. So it's a great start to the trailhead. One of the things we talk about in our kind of get to know people discussion, and we send it in the advanced materials too, is just to give them a sense of the scale of what they're getting themselves into. The rule of thumb that we teach is, roughly speaking, just plan on a mile an hour for the start to the summit. So figure it's 7 miles one way. It's plan on a 7-hour hike one way. And people, a lot of times people, they have a hard time comprehending that. Well, what do you mean it's 7 miles? I can jog 7 miles in, 3 hours maybe, or something like that, or a couple hours, if I'm just casually pacing it, because I can do like 10 or 12-minute miles or something. Very, very different at altitude, right? It's actually not a linear progression, but it averages out to something like 7 hours or slightly less, depending on conditioning level and things like that. And part of that is because the last 2,000 feet of elevation are going to take about 2 hours. Invariably, it takes close to that long for people for that last portion. And do you remember what your one-way time was, Lisa?
We got up there like around 12:31, something like that's when we reached the top.
So that was probably six and a half, I'm guessing, maybe. I'm not sure, because we started probably at 6 a.m. from the trailhead.
One good thing about doing an individual hike with your guide is that you can go at your own pace versus being in a group, which was one of kind of the pros of why I chose to do a solo hiking with just a guide.
Yeah. And that's a really important point, because we don't necessarily encourage people to do what are called meetups, because where you meet up with people you don't know, for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is one that Lisa just mentioned. Other people have different paces. And we have literally encountered and helped people on Pikes Peak who went out with their friends and got left behind because they were slower, right? So yes, another advantage to having a guide. But so 7 miles one way, let's talk about the one way. So we start off typically before sunrise, because our goal is to get ideally off the summit by noon. That's a really important kind of 14er rule of thumb, and ideally below tree line before any kind of afternoon thunderstorms. This is all about safety, and the rule of thumb, we change it based on the weather. We monitor the weather closely, and we change the start time based on winds and lightning forecasts. But that's all built into the math of assuming it's going to take us about 7 hours, worst case, to go one way. And then you've got to turn around for some people and hike back.
I remember a week after I had done Pikes Peak, in the news, somebody got struck by lightning for hiking Pikes Peak. Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah, it's unfortunate. It happens. And by the way, it's not always hikers. Sometimes it's, and I think this was the case with your trip, that was actually somebody that had taken the shuttle or driven to the top, and they were at the summit house, and they were just kind of walking around the summit house, which has lightning strikes
Wow.
all the time. Um, and one of the really scary things about it, we account for the weather and the forecast for thunderstorms and lightning and things like
Yeah.
that. But there have been cases where there's been not a cloud within 30 miles of Pikes Peak, and lightning is struck near the summit of Pikes Peak, um, just because of the weather phenomenon. So, anyway, we
Mhm.
talked a lot about the timing. It's actually a beautiful hike on the backside too. I would say just a couple of high points about it. So you start off in this very very cool, crisp, scenic valley with some rock formations behind you. There's a couple of stream crossings at the beginning. There's bridges. The trail is very well maintained. Um, and then maybe a mile or so into the hike, there's a split off where you turn left to go up to Crags, the rock formation I talked about, and you turn right to go up to the Pikes Peak Summit Trail. And again, why navigation is important. I've personally run into people, a mom with two young kids, kind of at that trail intersection point, starting off on the summit trail and seeing me as we're coming down from the Crags Trail and saying, "Hey, is this the right way to go to get to Crags?" I'm like, "No, actually, it's over this way." So navigation is important for these kind of circumstances. We do a couple of stream crossings there. The elevation gain in the first uh, probably 3/4 of the mile is significant. And I don't know if you remember it, Lisa, but we have a lot of people that they want to start out fast, and we have to kind of pull them back. We have to rein them in and say, "Hey, take your time." One of the rules of thumb that we like to talk about on our Pikes Peak hike is you want to be able to stay at a pace where you can carry on a casual conversation. If you're
Mhm.
huffing and puffing so much that you can't talk, you're going too fast. You're going to burn yourself out. In that first 3/4 of a mile, we see that a lot. People are like, very excited. They just want to go get this and get it done.
Yes.
So they come out of the gate too fast. Do you remember that experience at all, Lisa?
Yeah, definitely excited and nervous in the beginning. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's challenging to even, I think, people who are, moderately physically fit. So you definitely want to, pace yourself, rest if you need to, and really monitor and talk to your guide as you go of how you're feeling.
Yeah. And I generally like to talk with people about, at least for myself personally, and a lot of other people can relate to it. I talk about three phases of a 14er, and those three phases are the first phase, which is the highly motivated, high performing phase, because you're coming out of the gate fast, right? It's first thing in the morning. You've been planning on this. You've prepared for it. You're very excited. Everybody wants to get out there and really get after it. Uh, and then after whatever some amount of time, it could be a couple hours, couple miles, several hours, several miles, depending on the hike. You get into into the groove phase. We're like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of settled in and I've gotten into a pace, and I realize that there's going to be some effort and work and some time and energy involved in this, and you're just grinding it out, so to speak. And then I talk about how invariably it happens to me most times, not all the time. And it tends to happen to people that are doing their first 14 or a lot. The third phase is the somewhere between the what have I gotten myself into to the I regret my decision phase, right? When you've still got another hour or two to go and you're close to the summit, um, but you're not there yet and you're tired and you're maybe even a little bit sore. So those are very common phases for people to go through. The nice thing about Pikes Peak is, especially on the Crags Trail approach, is you have these amazing views looking out at the Rocky Mountains for literally every time you stop. And I tell myself this all the time, and it's one of the joys of hiking in general and hiking with people that don't do it that much. It's easy for people to get really focused on their own kind of physical condition and fatigue. And that's when I like to say, hey, we're going to stop here and let's just sit down and turn around and look out at that view. Look at these
Mhm.
beautiful Rocky Mountains out here. Uh,
Mhm.
isn't that amazing? Look at that rock formation. Or look at this wildlife that we see around us. There's just so much to take in on the way up Pikes Peak. So I don't know if you recall that. If that was your experience, Lisa.
Yes. Yes, definitely stop and smell the flowers, and you'll see different people along the way. We chatted with a few people. I don't know if you remember, there was an older gentleman, probably in his 70s, and he was behind us. And he came up and y'all chatted for a while. And lo and behold, he surpassed us. And it was very inspirational to me because I was like, wow, you know, this is something you could do at any age. And now, obviously, I think that guy was a lifetime hiker and has done this a lot, but I was still very impressed with him.
Yeah, yeah, I do remember that, and that happens more often than you might imagine. It's especially in Colorado, and I mean there are people, and I hope to someday be referred to as this, but you know, people I call mountain goats. You know, they've just done it their whole life, and you know, they're 75, 80, whatever, but they're still out there tromping away on the trail because their body's used to it. They know how to do it, and they gain joy from it. So that, by the way, that's one of the reasons that we call ourselves Hike for Life, because we do believe it's a lifetime activity and something that you can do at really any ability level. And it doesn't even have to be things like climbing Pikes Peak, right? I mean, I have climbed Pikes Peak with a 75-year-old, right? But that doesn't mean that everybody has to do that. You can go out on a 1 or 2 or 3 mile hike around other parts of Colorado that are just amazingly beautiful. And it's something you can literally do for life.
Definitely. I remember another area that we went through. It was called Devil's Playground. Can you tell the audience or listeners what Devil's Playground is?
Yeah, so Devil's Playground is the point on the Pikes Peak Crags Trail approach where a couple of things happen there at Devil's Playground. So first of all, it's the first point that we encounter the Pikes Peak Highway. There's actually a highway, it's a 2-lane road, but they call it the Pikes Peak Highway, that runs from the summit all the way down to Highway 24. So you can literally, under normal conditions, drive to the summit of Pikes Peak, and that's incredibly rare for most 14ers. There's 1 or 2 others where you can do that as well. So I mention that because it's one of the reasons that, another reason that we advocate for the Crags Trail. It gives you a lot of bailout and safety options, right? If somebody's having some issues, we encounter the Pikes Peak Highway there, and there are Pikes Peak Highway Patrol. It's not like law enforcement, it's part of the city's Pikes Peak Highway system that you can flag down for help and things like that if you need to. So it's a good kind of safety net to have that. And then you don't quite parallel the road the rest of the way, but you're always never too far from the highway for those last 1,000, 1,500 feet or so. That's the next point about Pikes Peak Highway. It's where you're reaching at about the 12 to 13,000 foot stage. Okay. And that's where altitude really starts to take its toll.
Isn't it also where there's more like, oh, sorry. Isn't it also more where there's like lightning strikes at Devil's Playground, like a higher chance of getting struck by lightning there?
Exactly. Yeah. That's why they call it Devil's Playground. And you know, the name is associated with the fact that in lightning storms, there's lightning strikes happening around there all the time. And somebody called it the Devil's Playground because of all the lightning strikes. So yeah, that's the third point about Devil's Playground. Not a place you want to be in a thunderstorm, right? Which is why it's so important to have that early start, get to the summit, enjoy it, turn around and start back down. So there's also, and I don't know that we did this, Lisa, I don't believe we did because we usually do it on the way down. There's a little bit of a peak right next to Devil's Playground, right before you cross the highway. That's the highest point in that Colorado county. Pikes Peak actually covers 2 different counties. And so for that county that doesn't include the summit of Pikes Peak, there's a high point that's just over 13,000 feet. And sometimes we'll pop people up there because high pointing is a thing, right? You know, people like to get to the highest point in every state, every county, things like that. So yeah, that's a little bit about Devil's Playground.
Okay. I remember the day of my hike, probably the most challenging part for me was like the last third, where the elevation was getting up to like 11,000, then you're at 12,000. And I think like definitely around 13,000, I could feel it. I could feel it in my breathing. I felt a little more tired. I needed a little few more breaks, you know, in between. And so just, you know, keep it in mind because you're at your tiredest at the end and you're having to go up rocks, lots and lots of rocks, and of course the elevation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we start talking about 2 other things that we try to teach people that are useful for a 14er summit. And these are not things that you need for your basic, hike in Colorado Springs to Garden of Gods or something like that. But we talk about rest, step, and pressure breathing, because we try to make the hike educational and pass on skills to you that you can use later on other trails and things like that. So this is pretty advanced stuff. It's not what I'd recommend other people try on, their walk in the Houston Metropolitan Park or something like that. But rest step is just a technique that we teach that allows your body to get these micro rests because you're using your bone structure to support your weight rather than your muscles. And then just like you talked about, the breathing, it gets harder at altitude. It's just a reality. There's less oxygen for every breath that you take in. And when you're exerting yourself, your body needs more oxygen. And so I personally talk about kind of like 3 phases of breathing. And there's kind of the normal day-to-day breathing that we all do when we're sitting around, even having a conversation. And that's kind of another way to refer to it would be kind of like shallow breathing. We're not using our full lung capacity because we don't need to, right? Our body gets enough just from kind of those shallow breaths that we take as we're sitting and talking or listening or whatever. The next one I talk about is relaxation or yoga breathing. Not everybody's done yoga, but that's why I talk about relaxation too. And it's just this kind of idea that you're going to take a breath in and you're consciously breathing in more than you normally would, but you're doing it gently. And then you're going to consciously breathe out more. And even just sitting in your room at your desk or something like that in the office, that can be very relaxing, right? One, because it's calming, I think, but it's also a way to get more air and oxygen into your bloodstream and out. But you're not like actively trying to force air in and out. And that's the last phase, is the pressure breathing. I learned some of this in the military, but it is actually something that's taught in advanced mountaineering. It's where you kind of want to actively suck air in and then actively push it out, right? You don't want to do it every single breath, but it is something that you want to do. And you should be able to hear somebody if they're trying to do pressure breathing. And I think we talked about this as well, Lisa. So, on the trail, especially that last 1,000 feet or so, and Pikes Peak is not a quote unquote big mountain, right? But it still helps me on 14ers even. You just want to, and I will usually stop if I start like feeling lightheaded or I feel like I'm not getting enough air. I'll stop and I'll use that rest step position where one leg is locked out and straight and the other one's relaxed. And I'll just take a breath in and be like, and so you're literally forcing the air out, right? And I don't have it happen as often now, but when I'm not as conditioned or acclimatized, if I would come back to Colorado, so I'm not as used to the altitude, and I'd start feeling like I needed more air. If I stop and do that, and usually 5 breaths, and I'm already starting to feel better. So I don't know if that worked for you or not, or if you recall that.
Yeah, I remember doing some like deep breaths and taking it easy and really kind of being aware of my breath and my breathing. So those are awesome tips. Really, really important. Another thing when I was doing my ascent is that really motivated me is that my mom was at the top of the summit waiting, and you can't just drive up there. You have to like go to a certain location, get on a bus, and the bus takes you up there. And so you have to kind of plan ahead. But knowing that somebody was going to be at the top of the summit waiting for me, friends or family, was definitely a motivator. But for those that maybe don't have friends or family, maybe Bruce will give you a hug at the end, which is always good. But that definitely helped me. I know for you, we offered you a ride home, but you walked back down the mountain. It would have been too much for me to walk back down because I was exhausted, elated and exhausted at the end. But that is another option. You could take the bus down, or you can actually go back down the mountain.
Yeah. And a couple of kind of context points about that. So when you did your hike and your mom rode the shuttle to the top, they're just about done, but they were in the middle of building the new summit house. And so they restricted traffic flow to the summit. It should be at the end of May of 2021. So this year is the plan that they will open the summit house and the road will be fully open to traffic. so that people can
Oh,
drive all the way up. So her
oh,
circumstance
that's
where,
gonna get crowded.
yeah, it will. It's going to be a beautiful summit house. It looks amazing, um, but it's not ready yet. Right now, they've torn down the old summit house, so the one that you were in is gone now. I mean, it's been razed, and there's nothing open at the summit. Um, so yeah, that's goes back to the Pikes Peak Highway. It's nice to have those bailout options or the one-way options that you took. We probably average about, I don't know, maybe 50-50 people that want to go one way versus do the full round trip. And kind of a point on that, it goes a little bit back to your, well, does this count as a 14er comment based on the height? Don't let anybody make the rules for you. Make them for yourself. Now, obviously, if you drive your car to the top of the summit of Pikes Peak and you get out and you step onto the concrete, you can't say, I climbed Pikes Peak, right? But it's very common when we talk to people and they say, oh, I was telling my friends I'm going to hike up Pikes Peak. And they'll say, there's a road to the top, right? Right? Pursue your own passion, right? And if that's hiking one way to the top and that's the right amount for you, and you catch a ride home with mom or you take a shuttle down, perfect. There's also something called the cog rail, which is another option that's opening back up. So don't feel like,
Oh, the train, the
don't,
train.
the train, yeah, the train's opening back up this summer too.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So there's a ton of options. Do what's right for you at your ability level. Don't let anybody say, well, you didn't hike back down, so that doesn't count, right? Of course it counts. You did the hard part to get to the summit. If somebody takes a helicopter to go helicopter skiing, it's not like that run didn't count because they took a helicopter to the top, right? Yeah.
Right.
So just a point about that. One way is totally a legit thing. Enjoy your own
Yeah.
experience.
Yes, and tailor it to whatever your goals are. And obviously your organization will help individualize the hike. If it needs to be just, halfway up the mountain, then you can do that as well. Do you have any other last minute tips that you would say if somebody wanted to hike Pikes Peak with your organization?
So we've given most of them. We're happy to answer any of the questions. I would say that we never guarantee that anybody's going to make it to the summit because there's just too much that's outside of individual control. So just it's good to have set goals. I believe in goals. I'm very goal oriented, but be aware that the summit may not always happen. And of all the summits, now I'm up to over 50, and I've got a few more to go to finish out all of Colorado's 14ers. There are probably a dozen times where I had planned on summiting a 14er and it didn't happen for whatever reason. A lot of times it's weather, sometimes it's personal conditioning or pace, or a group member got injured or something. We just had a guest that was coming out, wanted to do a winter 14er with us last week. And while 2 weeks ago it was 70 degrees here, on the days that he was scheduled to hike, it was going to be in town 30 degrees, 30-mile-an-hour wind and snowing, unsuitable for us to even take him. So we didn't even try. We just said, we know that you're flying out for this a couple of days early and everything else, but we're going to tell you that it's just not safe to do it. So make the safety call. Don't get what's called summit fever and literally put your life at risk trying to get to the top of something. And that comes back to, it's the journey more than the destination. It's that opportunity to get out for the experience. And if you summit, great. If you don't, it's still an amazing day in the mountains.
Yes, and you have to stop and smell the flowers along the way on the trail, because there's just breathtaking overlooks and just gorgeous nature all around you. I'm going to be putting a video of our hike at the end of this section. So stay tuned. Don't close out, people, because that'll be attached. And I just want to thank you for being with us today. I hope that a seed was planted. I hope that you guys found this inspirational. And if you want to hike Pikes Peak and decide to do it, I hope that you got a lot of good information today from Bruce and his great organization.
Thanks, Lisa. It's been great talking with you. And let me just echo that, people should not be afraid to get outdoors and enjoy themselves and just take that first step. And if you have questions about what that first step should be, feel free to call us or email us, and we'll help you get started.
Yes, and please leave a comment down below if you've hiked Pikes Peak before and you've had some great tips or strategies you would like to add to this, or if you just want to ask a question. Maybe Bruce will be hopping on here and looking at that later. He can answer, or you can contact him directly on his website. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time. Stay tuned for the video, the Pikes Peak Day video. Thanks. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Lisa. Take care.